Namaste and hello friends. I'm glad you've joined me for this second video in this series that I'm doing on Hindu philosophy and the notion of Hinduism. The first part of this series, I started off with a video where we talked about the root word Hindu, its meanings, its origins, and I argued that it's essentially what I call an ethno-geographical term. It refers to people who share a certain ethnicity and also belong to a certain geographical region. So that brings us to the next question as to what is the religion of the Hindu people, or commonly known as Hinduism, a word that I don't personally like to use that much, but for convenience sake, you can also call it Hinduism. However, worth stressing that we have already discussed that the word Hindu itself is not a reference to a religion per se. It's a reference to a certain people belonging to a certain area and sharing certain common characteristics. And those characteristics extend beyond religious beliefs. In fact, for the most part, those characteristics are non-religious in nature, but are shared. So in this video, I want to talk to you briefly about so what is the religion or the equivalent of a religion, if we argue that there is none, for the Indian people, or at least the indigenous Indian people, considering that there have of course been many people who have come to India from regions that are outside India, or at least historically were outside India. So we'll dive into those details today. I have made some notes, so with your permission, I do have a little book here which I'm going to refer to make sure that I'm covering what I intend to, as well as to get some help. So I think the first point that I'd like to touch on is, do the Indian people have a religion? You might have heard from several scholars, books, etc., that Hindus or Hinduism or whatever you prefer calling it is not a religion. Some people call it a way of life, some people call it something else. The way I like to look at it is that the word religion obviously traces its origins in the Western, from the Western point of view. And that point of view is mostly influenced by what we call the Abrahamic faiths, so Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. My point of view is that either we need to expand the definition of what a religion is, or find a different word, and I'll give you an example of that, of a kind of word that actually works better, to describe the religion of the Hindu people. So all I'm trying to say is that the religion of the Hindu people is not necessarily as structured or parallel in a way that we think it is for convenience, often in common parlance. But in fact, it's not. So using the same word sometimes simplifies it, but also conceals the fact that we haven't thought about it fully. So my suggestion is either use a different word such as dharam, or commonly pronounced as dharma as well, but dharam in Sanskrit, which is a Sanskrit term that refers to the Indic religion, if you want to put it that way. And it literally means moral duty. And that brings us, it's a good segue into what is religion, especially from the Indian point of view. The Indian religious system, if I can use that word now, is what I would call a combination of philosophy, epistemology, and ethics. Now, Western religions and Abrahamic religions in particular also do have philosophical, epistemological, and ethical elements. However, they also have some unique characteristics, like one important book and the concept of one God, a prophet, etc., which don't exist in Hindu thought. And therefore, the mistake, at least in my mind, that people make is to compare without distilling. So a comparison is indeed possible, but you can't compare Hinduism to Islam. You can distill Islamic ethics or Islamic epistemology and then compare it to one or from several available strands of Hindu ethics or Hindu epistemology. And we'll talk about some of those strands in a second. So comparison is possible, but I would say resist the temptation to make a comparison across Islam and Hinduism. A comparison between Islam and Christianity is indeed possible because they share certain characteristics and a structure, and the basic structure of their religious system is very similar, which allows that sort of a comparison to actually be made. So with that, now I want to introduce what are therefore the Indian philosophical, ethical, and epistemological positions, and we can simply call this as either the Indian religion or Hinduism or Indian thought systems or whatever you want to call it. I prefer personally calling it the Hindu thought system when I'm using English vocabulary. Now, there are six particularly important schools of thoughts, which are also called the Orthodox schools of thoughts. And there are three, or you can argue four, unorthodox schools of thoughts. In this video, we'll talk about the first six. Now, at the outset, it's worth mentioning that I'm not a religious scholar. I certainly have a budding interest in philosophy and religion as a student. But if you're interested in any of these schools of thoughts, I would encourage you to look them up yourself and study and derive any meaning from them. So I'm not advocating here which of these is a good view or a bad view. I'm simply trying to explain the six schools, as well as if I can actually mention before getting into that, the way I look at this is that Hindu thought is essentially what I call collective wisdom. So it is, it doesn't have a start and a finish. It doesn't have one book. It doesn't have like an epoch. It doesn't have a moment where revelation happened. It is really a tradition, which of course belongs to a very ancient civilization. And all of that has just come together and coalesced into some sort of a value system, which is what we call Hindu thought or Hinduism. And it is still changing. So one of its salient characteristics is that it's never been static. It changes with times. You can argue that there are some basic elements that are fairly static, but for the most part, it has been quite dynamic. So with that, let's look at the six orthodox schools of Hindu thought. All these six schools have a shared characteristic, actually two shared characteristics. The first one is that they all work towards the concept of attaining moksha, or very simply put, some sort of liberation, salvation. I wouldn't call it salvation, but the concept in Hindu philosophy is that the cycle of life and birth will continue till you are able to exit it. And I won't go into how you can, but the ultimate goal is to attain moksha and to end that cycle of life and death. So all these six share that one characteristic. They all help you achieve that. They are also overlapping, so they are not exclusive. It's not that one offers a path to moksha and the second offers a different one. They are, they're complementary schools, and I'll actually talk about how they can work together as well. And the third important characteristic which helps us classify these as six orthodox schools is that they all stem from a basic belief in the Vedas, which are obviously the I hate to call them Hindu holy books, but they're one of the most important works from 3,000 years ago at least, that on which a lot of Indian ethic, religious, and philosophical thought is based. So those are three characteristics which allow us to group these six schools into orthodox schools. So let's look at them. The first one is called Sankhya. Sankhya is what would in the West be called an enumeration-based or enumerationist viewpoint, which essentially is a view that you make an argument on the basis of lots of examples, and more the examples, the more the proof, and better the argument that you make. So that's the first one. The second one is Yog, popularly known as Yoga, but Yog is the right pronunciation. And of course, I encourage you to, for a second, not think about the yoga classes that you might be familiar in your gym or something. But yoga as an important philosophy in Hindu thought focuses on the concept of self-realization and actually helps you prepare yourself for self-realization by disentangling two specific terms that are used in Hindu philosophy called Prakriti and Purush. Again, more on these perhaps in a different video as to what they mean. But yoga is the second school that focuses on meditative techniques that prepare your mind for the ultimate self-realization. So it is not just a physical form of exercise; it is a spiritual and a mental form of exercise, which allows you to to head down that path. The third one is Vaishesihka, or a Western equivalent would be some sort of pluralism or atomic pluralism. Now, atomic pluralism refers to the belief that that the world and matter is made up of atoms, as the word suggests. But more importantly, it suggests that that diversity is caused by different shapes and forms in which atoms can shape matter. So it is a highly, at least from the time period that it belongs to, it's a highly scientific way of looking at things. And of course, a similar perspective on philosophical perspective in the West was popularized by Bertrand Russell, of course, much later. So that's the third one, Vaisheshika. The fourth one is called Nyaya, or again, a Western equivalent would be something like logical realism. And for my Indian viewers, you might, of course, immediately recognize the word Nyaya because it means to judge or some form of justice, and obviously courts, etc., come into your mind when you mention the word Nyaya. But Nyaya is essentially a system of reasoning. So you make an argument, you deduce from it, you present evidence, and then you come to some sort of a conclusion. So again, it's an epistemological view more than anything else. It tells you, or at least it explains one way of knowing, and that way is the logical way. Now keep in mind that to our minds, to the 21st century minds, the logical way of knowing seems very logical. That's because we are primed that way. But if you look at some of the other epistemological views, knowing via logic or deducing via logic was not necessarily the most important or popular way of knowing. So Nyaya is the fourth. The fifth one is called Mimamsa. Mimamsa is I don't know if some of you are familiar with the Western theological view of exegesis, which is essentially focuses on understanding the true meaning of texts. So whether it's the Bible in the West, or of course in our Hindu thought, it refers mostly to the Vedas. It's about trying to find and understand as it intended to be the meaning of the actual text. There is an effort to to deduce minus your own subjective understanding. But of course, the focus is on understanding the devotional meanings behind the text, as well as the rituals which allow you to master and understand the text. For this reason, Mimamsa is also known as, just let me confirm the word, it's called Purva Mimamsa. Purva means, the first one, or the preceding one. And you'll know why I'm saying that when I talk about the sixth school. But it's logically linked to the sixth school as if it's a first step. So Purva, and then you come to the next step, which is Uttara Mimamsa, or more popularly known as Vedanta, which is the sixth and perhaps the most popular school of thought in Indian philosophy. So the Vedanta school, the word Vedanta literally just means the end of the Vedas, or the last part of the Vedas, and it focuses on some of the core teachings or messages of the Vedas. And again, without going into too much detail, and Vedanta is probably the most comprehensive one, the key concept that Vedanta philosophy teaches or espouses is that there is a supreme being known as the Brahm, and there is an Atma or an Atman, which is some sort of an equivalent of your soul, but it's not the Christian concept of a soul, it's distinct. And the ultimate reality and you as that Atma are actually one. And the spiritual journey is about you realizing this. And hopefully you can now relate this back to some of the other things that I said. For example, yoga. Yoga was about preparing yourself for this sort of a realization. So the realization that you are no different from your from the ultimate reality or creator or creation. However, keep in mind that the concept of a creator as it exists in Abrahamic faiths is not in any way similar to the concept of a creator or a creation, if any, as it exists in Hindu philosophy. It's also worth mentioning that if any one of you have been exposed to Indian philosophy, either via books or friends or courses, it's most likely that it focuses on the Vedant aspect. All the other schools of thoughts, except for yoga, they're not in practice as much as they used to be. And also, like I mentioned, they are not mutually exclusive. So, when you're practicing Vedant philosophy, some of the other schools of thoughts are naturally inbuilt into your practice of Vedanta. So it's think of it as a ladder with the sixth step being Vedanta, rather than being there being six different ladders. Some of these are also grouped together in pairs. So, for example, you might hear the term Sankhya Yoga. So, Sankhya, the first one, and Yoga tend to go together quite often. You also hear Nyaya, Vaishesihka, and then Mimamsa, Vedanta, which I just mentioned, the last two, also tend to be grouped together because there are lots of commonalities between them. It's outside the purview of this particular video to actually go into the details of each of these. I would love to, I'm learning myself. But it's worth understanding that these are the 6 Orthodox Indian schools of thought, or to disambiguate the whole concept of Hinduism, these are the 6 important ways in which Hindus behave when it comes to some sort of a religious point of view. Although, as I've explained, that point of view is very different from what the Westerners are used to. And this is not about this being a better point of view than what the Westerners are used to. It's just that the differences are so strong, it's probably worth finding a different word to refer to this. And therefore, I mentioned that it's probably not worth calling this a religion in itself. So those are the 6. There are 3, I would argue 4 non-Orthodox schools of Hindu thought. This is where it becomes interesting, because there we start to talk about other religions, but religions which you would include in the Hindu fold. And again, in the Hindu fold, when you understand the word Hindu as per my first video, then it will start to make sense as to why I'm using the term the Hindu fold. It's not a way to impose an ideology on someone. It is just the historical way of grouping similar ideas, as well as ideas that are not as similar, and hence they're considered as the unorthodox schools. We'll look at them in the next video, but hopefully this video was useful. If you did enjoy watching it, feel free to ask any questions or make comments, as well as obviously share and like the post to make it popular and well known. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to talk to you again soon.